Okay, so Nick, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here with us today. Lovely to see you again. Nick, I think it is fair to say that you have a very long and illustrious career as a tech leader. You've spent a lot of your time in the gaming industry to date, so you've built up a huge amount of expertise in that domain. You have been a CTO, a COO, and a CEO. So you've pretty much completed the C-suite in your time, very impressively. You've also skillfully navigated the world of corporate mergers, and you've sort of, as a leader, tackled the blending together and the kind of challenge of blending together both technology cultures and people cultures of different organisations. So there's really not a lot you haven't done so far, which is always a great place to be when we're doing a podcast. We've got a lot of material I'm sure we can delve into, but difficult to know where to start. But I guess let's start at the beginning. If you'd be so kind to talk us through a bit about where it all began for you in tech and your journey to becoming a CTO, that would be awesome.
It would be my pleasure. So firstly, Guy, thank you. It was always a pleasure to meet you. And I've been very much looking forward to doing this podcast. So thank you.
You and me both.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to see you. What a great question to start with. Where did I start at the beginning? Okay. Little known fact that I actually qualified many years ago as an accountant. I did business studies, and I came out of business studies and I did accountancy. 2 years into the accountancy qualification, I looked at it and I went, I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life.
I wonder why.
I have nothing but respect for my CFOs in the past and people that do that job. I don't know, it just wasn't for me. And it sounds really strange. Can you believe this? I'm going to say this. Finance or IT, it's not really rock and roll, is it, working in finance? I thought IT was more rock and roll. So
I can say that.
I finished the qualification and I went to night school. And I went and got a computer science degree at night school. And that's how it all started. Okay. And because I thought to myself, I've got to get some formal qualification to be able to get into it. And I was working on, when I was an accountant anyway, I was kind of a systems accountant working on, there was a lot of stuff around at the time, like Oracle, ERP solutions and what have you. So I was kind of working on those anyway. Mm-hmm. But, I knew where the balance sheet was and the profit and loss and everything. But I just wanted to get a bit more cutting into code. And that's how I started off in the IT. And that's how I started my career. Was I moved out of accountancy into IT, and I have not regretted it one bit since. I absolutely love working in the industry. I think it's fantastic.
Fair enough. So would you say you've always had quite an analytical mindset, and I guess, like you say, there's not a huge amount of similarity, but both quite numerate degrees, and was that always a kind of a natural choice for you?
It's a really, you just said to me at the time, I'd have said no. I think you evolve as you get older, and you evolve into different things and in different worlds. I've always been very curious. I've always had a curious mind, and I've always wanted to explore and do new things and experiment and try new things out. And I don't know, I just felt that there was more opportunity to be, for want of a better word, creative. I can't believe I'm saying creative in the terms of IT or finance. But I wanted to be more creative in what I was doing. I felt there wasn't a lot of room to be creative in the finance world. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's creative accounting. We all know about that.
Let's stay clear of that one.
I also didn't want to get locked up. Yeah. I just felt there was a lot more opportunity to be creative. I felt that it used a different type of brain pattern in a more of a creative way, and it just really, really appealed to me because it seemed. I have to say, looking back at the time, it was really difficult. It was really hard. And it's nothing like the world it is now. I mean, now there's a lot more of it, and it's a lot more in it. But developing nowadays is a lot, I would argue, a lot easier, especially with GitHub Autopilot, something like that. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But back in those days, you really did have to think, and you had to be, there wasn't the memory that you have these days. In those days, you really had to tune your programs. So it was a much, much more, I don't know, I just felt it's a much more creative world to be sitting in.
Yeah, I can understand that, absolutely. I would say technology, certainly where it sits in the business today, I think it is quite a creative industry. I guess, like the nuts and bolts, the coding, that side of it, okay, that could be argued. Not, it's more sort of analytical, numerical. But in terms of where tech has evolved to now, and like I say, with a lot of the tools and dare I say AI, which I'm sure we'll come on to it at
Absolutely,
some point, that's evolving. A lot of the biggest problems in the world are being solved by tech, aren't they?
Absolutely. What's really interesting, I suppose, when I started out, mostly what you had was HR systems and finance systems, really. And then everything else was bespoke, and you wrote everything yourself. Nowadays, there's if you think back to the old days of the mainframe, you couldn't be that. There was no room for any sort of user. There were no such thing as a UX person in those days. It was very much, it was a 3270 emulation, and away you went, and you made it look as obvious and as easy to use as possible. I also think that IT's really, really evolved, and I think that when I started in the industry, it always invariably reported into the finance department, and I never really understood that, because I always felt that when you looked around, it was underpinning everything that the business was doing, and it was the one area that was open to change, and not only was it open to change, but it was also open to influencing all areas of the business, and I always struggle with that for years. And one of the things I'm really pleased about now is that you see IT directors, or what we're now called CTOs or CIOs, really are on the board. And I think most companies, if they would want to admit it, and I don't think many do, but I think most companies really are IT organisations now. They're longer that people can say they're service organisations, but not. What manages that service for them? It's the IT.
Yeah.
And without IT, I think most companies this day and age would be absolutely be stuck. They would be. I don't know. Who knows what they would do?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's definitely been a really strong evolution in the last sort of, I'd say, 15 years, or probably certainly since I've been in the job of recruitment, where tech is no longer the bolt-on, auxiliary function in the business. It is the driving force behind the business, in a lot of instances where you get purely tech-focused businesses now, which obviously didn't exist, I guess, 20, 30 years ago.
If you think about it, the managers back in, many years ago were people who, we'll put them in charge of IT, they can go and sit away and do that. And I remember like the IT crowd, where they're all sitting in the basement. It's not like that anymore. No. We're out there, we're at the forefront. And I think that IT really drives the business forward, and anyone that doesn't encapsulate that really is stuck in the dark ages. You've got to have the CTO has to be a board member, and is an important part of driving the company forward, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Cool. So you went to night school. You crossed over to the dark side of tech and have never looked back. So where did your career go from that point onwards once you got your qualification?
Well, so I was really a developer. So I was really, at the time, I was a developer developing programs, and then got this no one's listening to this, are they, guys? So I can say it.
I hope they are.
Now I've said that, everybody from my career is going to plague me now. And I'm going to admit something here. I kind of recognise that maybe I wasn't the best developer. Okay?
Bold statement.
I was okay. Okay? I was okay. I could hold my own. But I wasn't. You come across some people, they're just absolutely brilliant. There's a couple of guys I think about I've worked with in the past who, I just go and ask them a question and they're absolutely superb.
Yeah.
I was okay. I was average at best, and I got to admit that. And I thought, look, as a career path, I think there's more for me out there. And I thought that I could drive, I didn't want to just be a developer forever. And that's not decrying the role of a developer, because I think developers, for me, it's the heart and soul of the IT department. But I felt that, I looked at myself and I measured myself against other people, and I went, yeah, you're okay, but you're not the best. I was honest with myself. So I had an opportunity to go, I got a job, of all companies, Ladbrokes, offered me a job as a business analyst.
Okay.
And I took it. And it's a really, really interesting journey that I had, because I only wanted to. I thought to myself, right, this is great. I'll do 2 years here, get 2 years experience under my belt, and I'll move on. And I might move into project management. I might move into whatever I may go. And Ladbrokes was a fantastic launching pad for me. It was a fantastic opportunity. At the time, it was a very diverse company. I mean, I don't know if you remember. So Ladbrokes used to own all the Hilton hotels in the UK and the rest of the world, except for the USA. They owned all the Hilton hotels. They owned a lot of property, and they also owned, if you remember back in those dark days, Texas DIY.
Oh, yeah.
So they had a really diverse portfolio of businesses. Yeah. And there was a lot of sort of, it was interesting because they had a fantastic training program there as well, where they trained people and they brought people on. But you met people from all sides of the business as well. So it was really, really interesting. You met people, you were encouraged to work with people from Texas. You were encouraged to work with people from Hilton Hotels. There wasn't a lot of similarity in what we were doing, but we all tried to work together in one way. And it was a really, really strong opportunity for me. And I stayed there for 2 years, and I got the opportunity to move up, and I became a sort of like a project manager. And then I became head of development, because I had a development background, and I came from a development background. Fortunately, 2 years later, I became the head of development, and my career just progressed from there. And when I look back on those days, I mean, it was really really interesting, because there was no internet at the time; it was retail only, and the retail, and a lot of the business mix back in those days was mostly, it was all horses, then there were dogs. And then you would have football, and then every other sport was known as other. And then numbers came along. But it's really interesting. I mean, horse racing was the big part of the business, and it drove the business forward. And dog racing was only there. It's interesting, but dog racing was only there in the shops. And the reason why dog racing was there was to fill in the gaps between the racing.
Really?
Yeah, if you look at a dog race and you look at the times, they're not at 3:15 or 3:30.
It's true, actually. Yeah.
They're at 3:22 and the whole point is, the whole idea of the way that the program is developed is that the dog racing back in those days was in there because there was so little content, right, due to legislation and what have you. So there's so little content available to you that they used the dog racing to fill in the time between the horse racing. And it was a filler, so that's why it was number 2 in the product set. But it was a fantastic business to cut your teeth in. The internet came along, and what a fantastic business for the internet, because there's no fulfillment. You haven't got to worry about getting something delivered to someone's house, or get them sending it back because it's the wrong size. You place a bet, it's on, you win, you get the money in your bank account. You lose, you don't get the money. Yeah. And it was a phenomenal business from that perspective. Yeah. And so one of the things that I did there, I mean, I did many things. Crikey, I did Y2K. That was fun. And after Y2K, I got the first ever Ladbrokes internet up and running. Ladbrokes.work. It was actually called bet.co.uk, but then it became ladbrokes.co.uk and ladbrokes.com. Okay. I did a massive program of work in the retail estate where we replaced the whole of the retail technology. So if you think about the television screens that display all the information in the shop, a lot of their work, another couple of people, it was mostly RIP that developed this, that we developed a system which would broadcast to the shops content, but also updating prices, and worked very closely with the marketing department to create what we called a broadcast strategy. Okay. Because the whole idea was to make it sticky for people to want to stay in the shops, and make it it was very much like a TV studio, like a production job. But I mean, that cost 14 million. Wow. It was a big program of work, and that was just after Y2K. What was really interesting about that was, I have to say, I was really proud of this. I don't know if I should be proud to say I was late. I was only 1 week late on my initial estimate of getting it rolled out to 2,000 plus shops. So it was a really good program of work.
That's not about pre-agile days, is it?
No, absolutely. This is all waterfall, and this is all, but what's really interesting is, here's the thing. If you go into a Ladbrokes shop today, that's the same screen system 20 years later.
Really? Wow. Talk about future-proofing your software. Good work, Nick.
I think, well, it's interesting because I still meet the CFO of the company that we bought some of the hardware from. And he just says to me, it's the best. He said, we made it to, his exact words to me were, he said, we built it too well. And I said, I just start laughing at him every time. I think it's, how many people can say that it's 14 million lasted 20 years? You'd bite your
Very
hand
few,
off.
yeah, absolutely.
So it was a phenomenal investment, and it did really well. And from there, once I'd had that success, we developed our own channel, Labrooks TV, which was really interesting, which is to get supplementary content to put out there, so that we were looking for, this is basically when virtual sports came into play.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more of that, a lot more numbers product came out. And then we were also looking for content. And so we would go and buy content from different providers across the world and try and put it out there. So French horse racing was really, really interesting. So we put French horse racing in across the shop estate. Okay. Didn't take a lot of interest for some whatever reason, but we got the pictures out there, we got the content out there. Racing from South Africa, all over the world, football from different countries as well. And then I got the opportunity to go to Italy. Okay. And I went out with Labrooks and I created Labrooks Italia, Labrooks.it, and we bought another company called Pianeta Scamesi, which means Planet Bet. And it's because of the way that Italian legislation works, you had to have a provider with the Italian government. And what we did was we in the end we had about 400 shops and 400 corners like coffee shops where you could place bets. Wow. Very, very hard place to do business, but I had a fantastic time. I was out there for 5 years and it was brilliant. Absolutely enjoyed it. I learned so much that when I was out there, fully embraced the culture, managed to learn. I had about 40, 50 people working for me. I had the unions on my back once because I asked them to tidy up the office. But I could speak enough Italian to get it. It's not an easy language because my experience of Italian is, I think the average Brit talks about 3,000 words in their vocabulary, and the average Italian has 9,000. So you can imagine.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. They've got a lot more words than we have, I can tell you. But I managed to bluff my way through it, and it was a fantastic opportunity. And of course, what a great country to go and live and work in. So it was excellent. Yeah. Really, really good.
Fantastic. So Italy, you're out there for 5 years. When you'd finished up there, you'd obviously, that's no mean feat, I think, to go to another country, somewhere you'd never worked before, presumably.
No, I mean, Labrooks was an interesting company because I haven't given you the other part of the story. What actually happened was, so in 2005, Labrooks, we were then called Hilton, okay? So it was then on the stock exchange it was known as Hilton Group, and Conrad in the USA made an offer for all the Hilton hotels to bring it back under that one brand. Right. And it left Labrooks, and so in 2005 it left Labrooks on its own with it. It didn't leave it on its own, but obviously Labrooks then had a whole area to concentrate on, and it did have casinos at one point. We got back into casinos, which was really interesting as well. And they decided to concentrate a lot more in the gaming sector. I mean, the property gone. Texas DIY went to Homebase. Sainsbury's Homebase was sold to them during that time. Well, before then. Sorry. Let me a long time before. It became their whole idea, the ethos then was to very much create a gaming company, and this was really at the forefront of what they wanted to do. And it was a really booming time because if you think about it, the internet had come along. It was if you think about the early 2000s, the Blair government had come across, and I thought at the time the Blair government were trying to do something very clever. I don't know if you remember years ago that you used to have to pay tax on your bets. Now you don't pay any tax on your bets because it's gross profit tax by the bookmaker or the operator. And I thought that it was basically to stop all the bookmakers going across to Gibraltar because Labrooks had a business in Gibraltar as well. Yeah. And I thought it was a smart move at the time, and it's a pity that they didn't expand it further because I think they could have made the UK a real gaming hub for the rest of the world. I've said this in the past. I said it just recently on another podcast I did. But if you look in the gaming industry, what's really, really interesting is that most innovation comes out of the UK. If there's any innovation, and I look at this and I think about in-play betting, I look at cash out, I look at Bet Builder, all these products have been driven by UK bookmakers. They've not been driven from elsewhere. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I kind of thought at the time that the Blair government were looking to sort of make it a UK hub by dropping the tax. For whatever reason, it didn't come about. But it's a lot of innovation comes out of this country in terms of what we do there.
What do you think that is in the gaming sector in particular? Is that level of innovation that's taken place?
If you think about it, really, legalised gaming has been in the UK since 1963.
Yeah.
So there was a pedigree of it, and if you look across the world, it's we've only just seen in America that it's opened up. We've only just seen in Canada that it's really opened up as well for online gaming anyway, and so it's been something which has been out. That we've been a lot more liberal with our rules and the way that we address it. Some people might not think that, but there's a lot more opportunity to innovate. I mean, for example, when I was working in Italy, the Italian government would tell you what you could bet on, whereas we can bet. We had this infamous situation where the guy from Paddy Power, nearly got arrested because he put up a bookies board on the edge of the Vatican with the odds for the next pope, and things like this. And so there was, but you could never do that in Italy at the time. The very much the bet types and the events and the markets that you could bet upon basically came from the Italian government. So it's really so. In answer to your question, I think there's a lot more. We were a lot more liberal here, and the rules changed. And I think even now, I mean, we just saw last week. At the end of April, the government have produced this paper to rein in legislation yet again, and I think there's been some really good, interesting things in there about how the government want to address it, and they've got the Gambling Commission they've got a little bit more teeth because they feel that maybe the operators have got a little bit out of control. There's an opportunity within that white paper for the operators to self-regulate, and I think they will because they realise that if they don't. There's an awful lot of talk about problem gambling at the moment, and I don't think anybody in the industry wants problem gambling at all. Much like nobody in the beverage business wants alcoholics. Yeah. Or so I think that, but it's also an important revenue generator for the government. So they've had to walk a tightrope. The government. Yeah. To make sure. Sorry, I digress completely. In answer to your question, I think it's because we've had a long-standing liberal sort of approach towards gaming, and it's been well accepted. And I think it's why we've got that innovation in this country. Yeah, I think a lot of other people have been stopped by the regulations that they're limited by. Yeah,
never thought about it like that before, but no, that's a very, very good point. So yeah, we're at the point. So you've gone to Italy, as I say, no mean feat to kind of get 400 retail offerings out. And what brought you back to the
Interesting.
To the UK?
Well, it's the success was also our defeat, because one of the problems that you had in Italy was you had to reapply for the licenses. So you had to pay a fee for the license, and the licenses only lasted, and I think it was 7 years. It might be less. I can't exactly remember. Yeah. And Ladbrokes took the opportunity to sell the business. It was hard work. You couldn't guarantee that you could keep the shop in where you wanted to have the shop. So we sold it. We sold it back to an Italian company when we were out there, and so I oversaw the sale, and as part of that process, and I came back. And one of the disappointing things for me was that when I came back, there wasn't really a job for me. The world had changed an awful lot in the UK. 5 years out of head office was it was a completely different world. The CTO had changed. He'd gone back to Australia, and it was just a different environment completely. And at that same time, this little company called LVS asked me to go if I'd be interviewed, and I went and saw them, and it so transpired that they were backed by Français de Jeu, the French National Lottery. who are at the moment, they're probably the best kept secret in the gaming industry, but they turn over I think the last numbers were 19 billion euros a year.
That's obscene, isn't it?
So they're a massive organisation, and what they've done is LVS. LVS was an interesting company. They were another one that was a bit of a secret, but you knew about them if you were in the gaming industry, and they developed a system for Bet Victor.
Okay.
But it was a tier 1 high volume transaction engine written in Java, and it was with an Oracle database. Good technology base. I know some people listening to this are saying, "Oh, that's a bit backward. You should be using all the latest tools." And I'll tell you why it's fantastic. When I was the CEO of that company, I hadn't had a P1 outage. The last from when I left, the last P1 outage we had was in the World Cup in 2018. What I would call a P1, not what the customers, the customer will say. So you know what some people are like, I can't log in. No, it's not a P1. It's you've forgotten your password.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's not. But to me, a P1 is we can't do business, we can't take bets, or we can't take money. Not that something might not be working. No, proper. So it was a really very strong, reliable system. Anyway, digress again, because what happened was the French market had opened up. Now FDJ have 30,000 retail outlets where they offer fixed odds betting.
Wow.
And the internet had opened up and allowed them to have it, and they wanted an internet site. They were looking around, but they wanted to own the software. So what happened was they bought LVS, and I was kind of brought in to help them organise it. It was when I first joined LVS. It was a great company, fantastic CEO I worked for, a guy called Simon, who was a great guy. It always made me smile, always made me laugh. I used to call him Lord Ordish because he went to Harrow School and he was as posh as anything. But he was a brilliant chap, and his whole ethos was if he had 50 developers, he could rule the world. So you can see I was brought in to sort of bring it back to earth, maybe, and just say, maybe if we just finish this piece of work first. Then we'll look at world domination afterwards. It was kind of one of those things, and what we wanted to do, it was about organising them, making sure that they concentrate on delivery, making sure that they could, rather than starting new projects, because he was a technologist, and he still is today. I saw him at Christmas, and he very kindly took me to lunch, and we're having a great chat, and he's mining Bitcoin, and he loves technology, and whilst he was a CEO, because he was the founder, he didn't really want to be the CEO. He just wanted to be coding. And so all those things kind of came my way. And so I did a lot more of the looking after and the organising and making things happen and gelling it together and just, worked with him with the strategy. And I think we were very successful. Great company to work for, because what was great about it was that we had about 30 people there when I first went there. And we won a couple of big contracts and we grew and we were successful. But it was like a startup. There was all the fun of a startup, but with the backing of a 19 billion euro organisation behind you.
That's a pretty nice combination.
Yeah, so of course it was easy because you knew that they were there, they were going to back it, they were using your software. And the other thing as well, anyone in the gaming industry will know that once you've bought a sports book, to move away from a sports book is blooming difficult because you've got so many customers, and the migration task is a big job to do. People do it. No, we've done it. Customers in the past come to us, but it is a big thing to do, and it takes a lot of. I think the word kahunas is the word, but it takes a lot of those to make you want to go and do it. But we were very successful, and we went along. We moved forward, and Simon left because he decided to go and do new things, and we had a French CEO come in. He was a nice guy, really nice guy, but he struggled with the business. He didn't understand the business, and he did his 3-year tenure, and after that he left, and I became the CEO.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Stepping up into the hot seat, I guess.
Yeah, and we grew the company to about 120 people in the end.
Okay.
So we got enough contracts. We won contracts around the world. Very, very interesting time for us. Very exciting time. and we grew the business, and it went really, really well. Very proud of that achievement.
Excellent. How did you find that transition from a CTO into the CEO role? What parts of your arsenal of skills do you feel you kind of had to sharpen, or any areas that you had to sort of work on more so than in the role as a CTO?
Well, do you know what? I thought to myself, thank goodness I can read a balance sheet. So it wasn't all to waste.
Yeah,
it was interesting. I think what I found, what I've always thought is what's really important is about getting the culture right. Okay, and when I took over this role, what was important to me when I joined the company, it was a great company to work for. There was a lot of fun, a lot of laughter. And, you know, I had to do it in a softly approach to try and get them to concentrate on doing the right thing. And I've never changed that approach. But it's about creating the right culture, creating transparency. You know, so, you know, it's about making sure that the customer is at the forefront of the way that people think. It's about having transparency. And if you have transparency, then you're transparent. Then it's a lot easier for people to have those conversations. You don't get that backbiting. You don't get that. Of course, you're going to get people that moan, but you've got that transparency. You've tried to be honest and open with people. If you asked a question, I would always encourage open questions all the time. You know, and very much turn talk to people. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And it was also about focusing on the end product and making sure that if we were going to do something, that we finished it.
Yeah.
And you keep that. And I think that we had that kind of culture and that ethos that was created. And what was good about that was that we didn't have a high turnover. Bad for companies like yours, but great for people like me, because I could keep some consistency in the people that we had. And we had some really, really talented people. But still, some of them are still there. Some very, very talented people and individuals. But it was about getting the culture right, and about, you know, that was the thing that for me was important. And I hear so many people, you know, these days talk about culture, and you see these toxic environments. People talk about culture, but they create a toxic environment. So how can you have it? And I think as a leader, it's down to you as a person to be able to lead by example. And if you're transparent, and you appreciate transparency, and you say, and you don't play that blame game. You say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and if we make a mistake, it's that old saying, let's fail fast.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of failing; it's about learning.
Yeah.
And if you get that into the mindset and get people to think about that, then you can start to move forward, and you can start to, you know, you have. It's nothing worse than going into a massive thing of office politics and trying to sort that out. No, let's just go and sort this out. This is how I work. This is how I'm going to be. My door's always open. Come in whenever you want. You might not like the answer, but I'm going to be transparent with you, and I'm going to be honest with you. And this is the way we're going to work together. Yeah. This is what we're going to do. And if I'm not happy, if things aren't going, look, I'm going to set objectives very clearly for you about what we need to do. If we want a new contract, we need to deliver it by a date. Yeah. I expect you to meet. You know, this is. You know, but I'll talk it. And it's about those sorts of things. And I think one of the things that we worked very hard on is to create the right culture. And one of the things that we did, because we were a startup at the time, when I became the CEO, we had what the French would call a social plan. And what they mean by that was there's no pension.
Right.
There was no gym membership. There was no... the holiday entitlement was poor, the sickness scheme was poor, and we worked on all of those areas because we knew that we weren't attractive,
right?
And we knew that to keep people, you know, you had to have those things, and so the pension was was really important thing to bring in. We improved the holiday scheme, and we actually paid people a transport allowance, but obviously the obvious ones like childcare vouchers. We brought those in, all those things, but they all add up to stickiness to make people want to stay. Yeah. And to show people that you care.
Absolutely.
And of course, we didn't have that for a number of years. And so that was it was important to get that in. And once people see that you're trying to do that thing, and it's added because they haven't had it before. Oh no, I'm going to get 3 extra days holiday a year. Yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah. And
it becomes a much. It's a lot easier.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I was lucky because I didn't have to work too hard with the owners to get that across, because they were very supportive of, the point was, I was saying that nobody has this.
Yeah.
And we're not going to pick up. We're in London, the hardest place in the world to recruit tech staff. We're not going to get it if you don't start offering these sort of benefits to people.
Absolutely. Yeah. What I like about seemingly your leadership style, which I totally agree with. There's this big push on transparency, and I think that is a very, very good point to make as a leader. I think it's the number one priority I see as a leader, and just look at myself in the situation of trying to run, grow, and scale the business. Is there has to be that, like you just said there, with your sort of peers, alignment around, okay, what is it we're actually trying to do? Because I really think that's where a lot of companies go wrong. They just sort of assume that everyone in the business knows the mission of the business, and I think in this sort of world that we're in now, kind of transparency around purpose, and what is it we're actually trying to achieve, and what's my role in this mission, is becoming more and more front and center. And I think actually it's been kind of exacerbated a little bit since COVID. I've seen definitely a sort of almost an awakening in candidates of an awareness of what they're doing on a daily basis, and the company they're working for, and what is our mission, what do we do, what's my part, and all that kind of thing. And I think the biggest role now as a leader is that people actually understand who are we, what are we doing, what's our mission, what are our values.
Absolutely.
And like you say, once there is that transparency, I think you can then sort of not rule with an iron fist, that's not the right term, but you can be a little bit more, I think, assertive in terms of, like you say, you hold people to account, because everybody sort of understands their piece that they're playing within that bigger picture.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think, this, to me, your industry's infamous for it. I mean, the toxicity that can be created by people.
God, yeah.
I've heard of recruitment companies, now you all know this, I'm sure you're going to tell me what it's called, where you have to stand up until you've made a phone call or got a...
The power hour.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, and there's what I've learned. It's never been my... I don't ever think that's ever been my style.
No.
Okay. Probably get a load of people commenting on this now and saying, "Oh, he was exactly what he was like." Anyway, look, to me, I always think that you're only going to get the best out of people if you create a relationship with them and you work with them, and you're not going to get the best out of people by shouting and bawling, and walking round scowling at them all the time. It just creates a toxic culture, and that isn't the best. And look, it's. I think if you went back 30 years ago, you can all see those type of bosses walking around and what have you. But there's no place for it in the modern workplace. You've got to treat people with respect, and you have to realise that, there are other things in people's lives. And, you've got to get the work as, I'm probably the wrong person, about the work-life balance, because I really enjoy working. It's a big thing for me. But I think at the same time, I think you have to appreciate that not everybody's like me, and but you've got to find a way of getting the best out of people. Yeah. And I think that transparency, what I've always tried to do is, I just don't want inner factions fighting against each other. So you don't want the testers fighting with the developers, fighting with product owners. It's about creating harmony.
Yeah.
And trying to move forward. And I know the bigger the organisation, the harder it gets.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, it should be, I wonder how many leaders really think about this in that level of detail. I hear a lot of people talk about it, but do they really practice what they preach?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it boils back down to that word alignment, doesn't it? I think that we were talking about. And one of the biggest things for me, I mean, you're dead right. The recruitment is infamous for just very toxic cultures of, really putting profit above people. And when I started True North, of course I wanted the business to be profitable, of course I wanted to be successful, but the culture was the most important thing for me to get right, first and foremost. And it's quite interesting you talk about, the kind of the social plan or the benefits plan. I mean, recruitment historically is horrific when it comes to any kind of benefits. Pension is usually absolutely bog standard pension.
Yeah.
Not a lot to speak of by way of any of the perks or benefits or that kind of thing. But when I started the business, even as a very early stage startup, the most important thing for me that I could include in the package is healthcare. I wanted to include private healthcare for everybody that came in, because it was, we started literally just as the pandemic hit. So it was quite topical at that time anyway. But to me, kind of as the MD of the business, I wanted to send that message that, as cheesy as it may sound, I care about you as a person. That's the most important thing, is actually that you're okay, your health's okay. And I think that, not subliminally, because I don't need to do it underhand, but I think when people feel that they are genuinely being valued as a person rather than, a number on a piece of paper, which is unfortunately, in a lot of recruitment companies, the way people feel. I do think, like you say, you get not necessarily the best out of people, but people turn up every day wanting to contribute, wanting to do a good job. And
Absolutely.
I think, if you've got that combined with the clarity of the mission and that kind of thing, that's when special things can happen, I think. And, when you truly can achieve some kind of scale. So
you're absolutely right, and I mean, that's why they're getting that. What they called the social package was right, so important, because private health was part of what we offered. Not everybody opted to take it because they realised they had to pay tax on it, but at the same time, it was there as an option. And so you put all these things together and you start to look at it, and you've got quite an attractive plan coming. You're getting quite an attractive workplace to come and work in. And like I say, I think I can't emphasise enough the whole point about transparency. I think that is so important.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So CEO, next step on the journey, where do we go from here?
So FDJ had a lot of ambition. So FDJ was obviously state-owned for many years, from its inception. And it was originally started off for very much like the poppy appeal in the UK, and it was created for injured soldiers in the First World War. That's the basis of the lottery. And it was very much owned by the French government, and what they did was they put the money in, and the French government decided where the money would be spent. Very forward-thinking company, had a female president, Madame. She had a Madame President. She was so very forward-thinking from that perspective. Very much feminine issues at the forefront of the. There was no place for old school tactics, as we might call them, or it was very much a forward-thinking company, and it was. I was very impressed by the ideas that they came up with when I was working there. Anyway. What they did was they'd obviously wanted to own the software. They owned us as a company, and first 5 years they left us alone, and then they started to show a lot more interest in us, and we started to grow as the business grew. And they IPO'd in 2019, and at around about the same time they realised that they wanted to do more international expansion, and my understanding of this was that they were told, if they look at the growth in the business, they're only going to get the retail price index increase in terms of lottery sales, which is not going to really grow their business in any great shape. So what they wanted to do was they had this, and I would say that, my product, the sports book, ABP, I'd say it was the jewel in the crown, because it was it's a high volume transaction engine. We could take 500 bets a second. Wow. They were very, very, it was a very good system. And I was very proud. I have to say, even though it wasn't I was very proud of what we achieved with it, and the things that we did with it, because we continually evolved it as it went along. And what FDJ wanted to do was to open up into some sort of B2B business, and they wanted to get into international expansion. So they looked around and they bought Sporting Group. Sporting Group basically is, most people will know it as Sporting Index, which is the spread betting side of the company. Yeah. But a little known fact is it's not a little known fact in the gaming industry, but they also have a data feed, which is called Sporting Solutions. And what Sporting Solutions data feed does is it gives you all the markets, all the events. Sorry, I shouldn't say matches because that's wrong because not everything is a match. All the events, all the markets for those events, but they've also have a pedigree, as they quite proudly say, in pricing, because obviously their whole business from a B2C perspective, they were all historically had very strong trading background, and they always had the when I think back to when Sporting Index were first in the industry, and funny enough, bizarrely, when I was at Ladbrokes, I actually built a spread betting system for Ladbrokes called Ladbrokes Sporting Spreads, but we sold it to IG Index after 2 years because we couldn't make any money out of it.
Okay.
But it went to, anyway. So I had, I did know all about it. FDJ went and bought it, but I think they predominantly bought it for the B2B arm, because the ambition was to spread that whole international business. So if you think about it, what they then had was the whole, from a sportsbook perspective, the whole, for want of a better way of putting it, the old Microsoft saying soup to nuts. So they very much had the content in terms of the data for the events, for the markets, and for the pricing of those markets. They could then feed that data into a sports book. Of course, our sports book had a trading platform. It had, obviously, it accepted and settled bets. It had a player account management solution. It had a front end solution that we developed as well. So there was an awful lot of components within that. And then on top of that, you had the trading expertise as well. The traders from Sporting could actually manage the liability. So you then had a compelling proposition when you went out there to go, and because there's a lot of B2B businesses out there, and some people, I've been around the world. I've been very fortunate. I've been around the world in this job. And some people, want you to take over the whole managed service for them and pay you the fee to manage the service. Some people want to do the trading. Some people want to manage the front end but give you the rest. So what we could do is we could cut and paste whatever you wanted to do, because we had everything. Yeah. The whole idea was we wanted to be able to roll it out across, wherever we could, give them as much as anybody. And one of those areas that we did it was the Canadian market. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the USA at the moment, or it has been. The Canadian market also opened up, and we won the bid for the Ontario Lottery Group. Okay, which was a massive, yet again, another large organisation. And if you look at Ontario, it's in terms of, if you look at that and the United States together, Ontario, I think, would be the fifth largest state. So there's a big opportunity. Anyway, we won the Ontario Lottery Group, OLG, a site called ProLine Plus, and that's live, and that was for retail and online and app as well. And then on top of that, we did, and this goes to show you, this goes to show you how strong the team I had in the old FDJ Gaming Solutions team was. There was a failing project in the Alberta Gaming Lottery and Drug Board, because obviously marijuana is allowed to be smoked in Canada. Yeah. So all comes under control, under the regulation. And it was they had a failing project for a sports book. They came to us and said, "Can you do it in 3 months?" And we did. We got a sports book live, and we did a little bit of a lift and shift. Yeah. But very much, sorry, excuse me, a little bit of a lift and shift, but very much got something live in 3 months. And if you look at the two websites, Play Alberta and ProLine Plus, they look completely different. Wow. But it just goes to show you what you can achieve with high caliber staff that are motivated to do the right thing. Really big achievement. I was very, very proud of that.
Absolutely.
Of what the guys did. And it was just a fantastic opportunity for us. And we got, we had a genuine interest in North America, which is a big marketplace. As you can see, it's growing and growing all the time.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, it sounds like you like a challenge.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm one of these people, Guy. I run towards the fire. I don't run away from it.
I usually start the fire. So.
Well, I'm not going to... You've been known as the fire starter.
Yeah, so they say.
Yeah. No, but no, it's one of those things where I'm not afraid of a problem. I'm quite happy to, look... What is important to do is to not lose your head and to think about it and look at it and say, look, everything's resolvable. It's about how you address it and how you manage it and how you cope with it.
Yeah.
And how you deal with it. And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
if you can garner people in the right direction, then you have, that's half the battle, is bringing people with you.
Yeah.
Got the right culture, people will go that extra, will work late at night and they'll go that extra yard to make it happen for you.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's going back to what you were saying earlier about framing culture, insofar as framing failure as it's okay to fail.
Absolutely.
And like I say, it's learning from when things don't go in the right direction. Because that, certainly within recruitment, I look at the kind of the culture that's created in a lot of those more draconian kind of stereotypical recruitment companies, and there is just an inherent fear of failing or doing something stupid or whatever because of the the management style of a lot of old school recruitment managers.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy because you think about, well, it's like any job really, but in recruitment, I look back over my career, like 70-80% of my learning has been going wrong. Yeah, it's doing something wrong and then learning the right way to do it as a result of that. And it really does, I believe, probably make a lot of people exit the industry, that have a real innate ability to do the job, a real talent, just far too early because of the way, they're managed and the kind of pretty toxic cultures that are created around failure. I totally agree with you there.
Especially when you think about it, when we're successful, we don't really think about it, do we? When we're successful, we just go, I was good, look how good I am. And I think that in anything that you do, you should always take a little bit of time to reflect on what you did right and what you did wrong. And, I always think that, you can't continue to fail because that's obviously you're going to go nowhere because, you have stakeholders. You've got to, we all work for someone. So you've got to keep the stakeholders happy. Yeah. But at the same time, you need to say, why did we fail and what do I need to do? And whether it be your product, whether you failed in a bid to try and win some business or whether you failed to try and implement, and these are all things over the years that I've looked at. I mean, I had a particular problem with the sports book where I couldn't win a contract because I was too expensive. And what I did was I looked at the area and I came up with a 4-pronged strategy to readdress the product because I knew we were too expensive. And one of the areas that were too expensive was on the front end. And what I developed was a product, we called it widgets, and basically they're key components of a sports book. So whether you have the navigation bar or the competition, and then you drill in a competition, it goes down to the market level for that match.
Yeah.
And you put the market into the bet slip, and the bet slip would be another widget. Anyway, we ended up with about 45 widgets. But the reason why we were able to do Play Alberta so easily was these were products that we had which worked to the API.
Oh, okay.
But all you needed was if you had someone who could do CSS, you could restyle them to your heart's content. They worked on both the app and on the web. So all of a sudden, because I'd very often get caught with the marketing people who would be saying, oh, it's the wrong pixel, you got that wrong, and then when you change it, you go back again. And I thought, I've got to get out of this cycle of just going round and round. And I've got to give it so that if you've got, and at the time as well, there was a lot about people wanting ownership. Well, okay, you only had CSS, but look, you can style it however you want, but you can't change the API, because it's a product and we're going to push this across our customers. And it was really successful because it dropped money out of the business. It gave me two things actually, because one is for some customers it was provided as a rental. So I got reoccurring revenue, which was something that I was looking to achieve. Yeah. But at the same time, it also put the power back in some other people's, it's 3-pronged really. It put the power back because people believed that they had some ownership, so they owned the front end, so they could restyle it to their heart's content using copies of the widgets. But it also, for me, it speeded up our delivery because it took money out of, because we weren't recarving everything from scratch, we weren't handcrafting everything from new. We had a very, very good, strong starter for 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess saving time is always going to streamline any delivery, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, we're going to do other things and build other things and improve things. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, I'd like to kind of draw to a close by asking a bit about your management style when, you're sat as the leader of a business. You've got two joining entities, essentially, and there's a lot of moving parts, obviously, from a technology point of view. How do you unify two tech stacks, but also from a company. And like I say, every company out there will have a very unique culture. So how do you actually, from a people culture point of view, find the common ground and unify those? So what sort of, talk us through what approaches you took there to enable that sort of smooth transition between the businesses when they merged?
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough gig because Sporting in the past had been owned by venture capitalists, and we all know that venture capitalists want to sweat the asset, and so there had been an awful lot of sweating of the asset. What we did was, by going in there, it was about making sure that we could work with people, and it's the same approach again. Having that transparency, trying to talk to people, bring people on board, getting it across to them, but also looking at what was working and what wasn't working. And I wasn't afraid. We had a project which was failing, which had a number of contractors on it, and I wasn't afraid to cut those contractors because I couldn't see what they were doing. Nobody could explain to me what they were doing, and so I cut them. And there was no change. Everybody told me it would be a disaster, but I just looked at it. When it was demonstrated to me, it wasn't. So it's about going in there, looking and understanding, and just listening to what people are saying, understanding what those pain points are, taking all those things on board, trying to understand what's working and what's not working. I mean, as coming in there as the CTO, what was really important for me was to understand the technology stack. And another thing that I realised that I had to do was to go through a process of rationalisation as well, because there was a plethora of tools, and you wanted to make sure that you took away those tools. You wanted to get as much of a common base of tools as possible.
Yeah,
and there was also keenness. You get this with developers as well, that they want to bring in the latest technology, and sometimes you have to say, "Whoa, hold on a second." And I've got to be honest with you, I looked at this and I did a little exercise, and I looked at this and I went, because we were an open source site, and Sporting were a .NET site, but there were lots of other fringe activities going on in the Sporting. But you looked at it and you went, okay, so what are we going to? We're not going to be able to move from open source to .NET, or we're not going to move .NET to open source. These are core systems that are written in these. We're just going to. This is the way the life is. But I did look at it to see what look at other because there was a big move for other products to be brought, other software development tools to be brought in, and you look at it and you go. I did a little exercise and I went, how many jobs are there for Java developers? Thousands. How many jobs are there for .NET developers? Thousands. How many are there for Rust developers? How many are there for Erlang? And you see, and it all becomes a little bit niche. And you say, okay, if I'm going to have any, what I've got to do is have some success here. I can't change technology stacks here at all. Yeah. This is a 5-10 year project away. What I need to do is make sure that I can get the right bit. And then you do the salaries as well, and you see that the salaries are probably £10,000, £20,000 cheaper for a Java developer or a .NET developer than they are for some of these emerging technologies.
Yeah.
And you have to be really, really careful. So that's, those are things that you do as well. Rationalise the technology. I would do an all hands with people, and I'd encourage anonymous questions, because sometimes you notice that people won't ask a question if you want their name. I mean, one of the ones that made me laugh was I talked about, one of the things I brought in was change control, because I recognised that we had a real issue with quality, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I went and I brought in change control, and I explained why I was bringing change control into the business, and that there had to be a change board, and I sat on the change board. I made sure that I was there, because there's no point me pontificating about change control and then just not turning up to the meeting and leaving it in the hands of everybody else. And one of the things I said, look, as far as I was concerned, I can't look at everything, but the QA people are going to be my ears and eyes. And if they're not happy with it, it doesn't go live. Straight up comes an anonymous question. So you're blaming the QA people, are you? You're going to blame us for not making something go live? That's not what I said. What I said was, you're empowered to help me. And it's just the way that people, you can see the culture, the way the culture was in the past, and what you've got to do and how you've got to win it over and say, no, this isn't not what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is, I need you to help me. I can't look at this. If you're telling me it's not good enough to go live, the quality isn't there, it shouldn't go live. Yeah. You're empowered. You're empowered to do the right thing, and it's about changing that mindset from changing it into a negative, into a positive. Yeah. And these are the sorts of little things you have to dig away at to get out of the way. We basically changed it. We've got 24/7 support in. We got the change control in, and I wrote a document after about 3 or 4 months. I called it the manifesto. And what I basically did was, when I brought the companies together, is that one of the things that FDJ are very keen on was making sure that people had objectives. Okay. Now, IT people are notoriously bad. If you go to any IT department and ask them to give you 5 objectives, you'll probably get 2 each person. This is easy. I'll give everybody 3. Everybody in the company will have 3 common objectives. So the manifesto was very much built around stability, so making sure that we had uptime. We wanted to get the uptime up. It talked about quality in terms of producing high value and high quality in what we did, and including within that was the delivery. The third pillar of this manifesto was performance. Because if you're working in the gaming sector, much like the financial services sector, you can't have any lag. You've got to have low latency systems, because you're talking about real-time transactions. So it's also thinking about having these things at the forefront of your mind, that you're thinking about stability. You want to make something stable, that it stays up. You want to have reliability. You need to have performance. And so I created 3 objectives for everybody. And so everybody had a common objective, and including myself in that. So we either succeeded together or we failed together. But it was about making sure that you got the common message. And so, it's also, you could also hear the relief when I did the all hands of people. You could almost hear the sigh of relief that they only had to do 2 objectives. They didn't have to come up with 5, and it made the whole object. Now, I joke aside, but it's about making sure that everybody's on the same page. And it was about presenting that manifesto and saying, look, this is, as we're joining the company together, this is my vision for the future. This is what I think good looks like in the next year or 2. And then there'll be another manifesto, and we'll just tune it as we go along. But we've got to get the basics right. And if you don't get the basics right, it's interesting, because I'm a great believer in, if you can do the basics, the hard stuff comes really easily. And how many people don't do the basics? If you can get the basics right, everything else falls into place. Yeah. And so it was about getting the basics right, doing all the good things. Some of it was low-hanging fruit as well. Some of it wasn't too difficult, but it was about building confidence as well, and saying to people, we achieved this, we've done really well. Now, in my head, I was thinking, should be higher than that, but okay, look, Rome wasn't built in a day. I've got to give people something to hang on to think that they're being, to believe that they're being successful, so that we can move it forward and get to where we want to be in the long term. But it's about taking steps along that road to nirvana. Yeah, absolutely. And all that, I think, boils back down to your philosophy of transparency, isn't it? Of clarity and transparency across what it is you're looking to do. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that's very, very great way to draw to a close. So I like, as you probably now know, end every podcast by asking one final question, if you'd be so kind. And Absolutely. That is, throughout your career to date, what would you say is your one favourite piece of advice that you've ever received that you'd like to pass on to your fellow human? I've got 2. Can I do 2? Please do. Something really struck me many years ago. When I was working at Ladbrokes, Vernon's pools came under my governance, for a better way of putting it. And I went up, that was based in Liverpool near the Aintree racetrack, literally across the road from there. And you had a really interesting organisation there. I mean, it turned over 5 million every year, but it was a really interesting business. Some very, very committed people there. And what they had was you'd walk around the building and they'd have little posters up saying things. One of them really struck me. And I'd driven up there. I went up there in the day, so I'd driven 4 hours up there. I was leaving and I saw it and it said, "We recognise that nobody comes to work to do a bad job." And I thought about that, and I thought about it all the way back home. And I thought, it's so true. Yeah. Nobody comes to work. If you get that, you can't think everybody's an idiot. The whole thing is to say, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. People come here because they want to earn money, because they want to support their families, and they want to do the best that they can while they're here. Yeah. And I think that 99% of people think that way. Yeah. You get the odd one or two that you can't do anything about, you can't help them with. But in my career, I genuinely felt that, and it made me really, really think quite deeply about it all. And when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah. And I loved that. The other one, I thought, man, I've worked for some really good people in the past. I've worked for some absolute bloody nightmares as well, but we won't talk about them because we've learned to move on from those.
Absolutely, we'll put those in there. Yeah.
But another thing I learned as well is about trying to stay, not to go too high, not to go too low. Now, what do I mean by that? And I learned this from. I can't believe I've got no way I'll direct this out from, but it's a Chinese culture called Daoism, but it's spelled Tao with the T.
Yes, I know. Okay. Dao De Chang.
Yeah. Okay. And it was an old philosophy, and I read this years ago, and I thought this was really true. And it was about an old farmer, 3000 BC, something like that, farmer in a Chinese village, and he had a horse, and he was seen as the richest guy in the village. And one day the horse ran away. And everybody said, "It's a disaster. You've got no money. This is it. You're destitute." And he said, "Maybe." 2 days later, the horse comes back with 2 wild horses. People say, "You're the rich. This is fantastic. Look how lucky you are. You're the richest man in the world. You've got in the village. Sorry, not the world. In the village, you've got 3 horses now. How lucky are you?" He said, "Maybe." A few days later, his son took out one of the wild horses to try and train them, to break them. And his son fell off and broke his femur. Now, breaking your femur back in those days was almost like life-threatening. And they said, "Oh, this is terrible. You are so unlucky. Your son's going to die. This is so bad. Your son's so ill. He's broken his femur. He may well die." And he just said, "Maybe." A week later, the Chinese Imperial Army came in and took all the young men out of the village. He said, "You're so lucky your son's still with you." And he said, "Maybe." And that is an important lesson, because during that period of time, he had some really highs, he had some lows, but he just tried to stay in the zone to try and deal. What he might have had some inner turmoil, but he might have been pumping the air, but he was just trying to stay level so that he could, okay, I'm lucky I've got those, but I do know things can change. Yeah. And it's about really just trying to stay as level as you can and stay in the right place. And you of course we get excited, of course we enjoy things, of course we get down, but don't go too high, don't go too low. Just try and just enjoy.
I love that. Yeah, it's a great way to end, because I actually had this exact thought yesterday that, life is all relative, isn't it? Like, you look at all the frustrations and the problems that you have on a daily basis, and, it's so easy to get worked up and stressed about them. But actually, when you compare yourself to, the next person walking down the road, you've always got so much you can be grateful for and so much you can be thankful for. And it's a similar phrase, but one that I think I've definitely got a tendency. I'm quite a positive, upbeat person generally, but I have a tendency, probably when it comes to myself and my own performance and that kind of thing, to always look at the glass half empty. So one of the ones that very similar to what you said there
but that's about you being. But that's what drives you, I think, because I think that's what I'm a little bit similar, and I think it's about driving myself to say, I'm always striving for the perfection that I'll never achieve, almost. And I think it's what drives you and it keeps you in the zone because you're always looking to do better. You're curious. Yeah. I think it's about you're curious and you're trying to do better. I mean, the other way to look at it is there's nothing you can do about the past. The past has happened. All you can do is learn from it. And you can't worry about things that haven't happened yet.
Very true.
You've got to say, well, maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't happen. There's so many, you think, oh, well, we could walk out of here today, or I could go home. It could be a train crash. I could get run over. You just got to be steady.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's, the one I heard was see things as they are, don't see them as worse than they are.
Yeah.
Because everyone, I think, has a tendency to always look at stuff as what could happen.
Absolutely.
But actually just look at it as what's going on right now. And,
Absolutely.
And work with what we can. So,
absolutely, Guy. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to speak to you, and very much enjoyed our conversations. I always do. I know we spoke about it before. There's quite a few areas we were hoping to build into this podcast, but I dare say we're going to have to invite you back to do another one at some point because we didn't even get around to talking about GitHub Autopilot.
We didn't talk about Autopilot, although I did mention it because that, I think, that is a fantastic way to get away with pair programming now, isn't it? And listen, I'd love to come back and talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT.
Absolutely, sure. That's the next one. We'll get that one booked in then.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Guy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
No worries. Thanks for coming, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.